Codependence, Pernicious, Cunning, Baffling, presented by Julie Bowden.
Julie Bowden. And even as some of you continue to get settled, I'm going to let you know that I'm here to talk about codependence and that I find it a very serious subject. I felt blessed to get to talk about Genesis this morning. This afternoon feels a little heavier to me. I find that codependence is so pervasive and so familiar that we often do not know what we're dealing with, and we often do not recognize it. It reminds me of what's called white noise. When I was doing an internship at Family Service Agency in the early 70s, our offices were very small, and one therapist would be probably 10 feet or less from one another. And so what we did to deal with the fact that we were so close to one another was we put on a continual, constant sound, a stream of sound that was background. When you first walked in, you would notice it. After you'd been in the office for 5 minutes, you heard nothing. It became background noise, and it covered over any of the sounds that might have gone from office to office. It was white noise and became inaudible. Codependence is like that. I selected a title and I used some words that many of you who are affiliated with AA certainly recognized. I call codependence pernicious, cunning, and baffling. And I'd like to read you some of the definitions of those words just to heighten your awareness about what we're here to talk about. Pernicious, destructive, having the power of killing, destroying, ruining, or injuring. Cunning, skillful in deception, sly and crafty. And baffling, puzzling, bewildering, inscrutable, obstructing, and hindering. One of the reasons this disease is so hard is because it's so widely accepted, and because for people who have been in an alcoholic family, the training comes very early. As we talk today about codependence, it's very likely that you will experience that you have a whole set of feelings about this. And as I tell stories about how we do it, how it expresses itself in our lives, you might feel yourself becoming uncomfortable. You might feel yourself getting upset. You might laugh at yourself. You might get angry at what has happened in your life. So what I'd like to do is to get a guide for everybody. And as I was thinking about this talk and thinking that it would be good to have you go ahead and get a guide right at the get-go, I realized that the guide I would have you invite to be with you as you sit in your seat is probably the one who will lead you out. What I'd like to do is take these first few minutes and have you get in touch with your child within, because I think that we need that kind of help and those kind of ears. So do get comfortable. I see many of you are already kind of putting things away. A lot of the healing in the field right now is coming through the child within. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's perfectly all right, because it comes to us in a whole variety of ways, in a whole variety of faces. What I would like for you to just take a moment and disconnect from this room. Just let the sounds around you, the breathing around you, become background for a journey inside. I'd like you to notice your breathing and turn your eyes inward to your own body, to your own system. And then move inside. Kind of feel your way around inside yourself as you breathe, as you sit in this room with 700 beating hearts. Hear your own heart. And for just a moment within yourself, allow yourself to feel the safety that you have right now, this moment. And in this place and moment of safety, allow that child that was you to come to you as an image, a figure, a feeling, a sound, any way you sense that child you were, any way that child now lives within you. Let the small hand of that child be placed in your large adult hand. Notice the difference in the size of the fingers. And then let that child know that he or she is invited to be here with us today in this room now. And that while you promise to take care of her or him, that you would also ask this child to lend his ears, lend her eyes, and help you know what this codependence is to you. There's an old saying, and a child shall lead them. So even as you, the adult, take responsibility for protecting the child, allow the child to be here in order to lead you. If you have no sense of the child that you know of, then just know that you just sent a signal inside saying, "Kid, I'm going to be wanting you, and I am opening the doors to having you back in my life. I need you now." When you finish that connection with your kid, hold his or her hand firmly, not tightly. And then allow yourself to come back in the room with the both of you and be in your seat together. You can do that when you're ready. I would like to share with you, both of you, all of you, the first recorded instance of codependence that I know of from the Bible was right after the flood. Maybe it was tears, who knows? After the flood, Noah and all those folks that went with him were setting up house. And Noah was the first tiller of the soil. He planted a vineyard. This is Genesis 20, chapter 9, verse 20. He planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and became drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon both of their shoulders, and walked backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Did they take care of him? I read that once before, and I hadn't noticed that the verse ahead of it is very telling. Verse 18, the sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled. So now we know where it came from. Actually, it's not genetic. It is learned. And guess where we learned it? I believe that codependence is as toxic and as poisonous to our system as is alcohol. I also believe that in one sense, there's a benefit to being alcoholic rather than co-alcoholic or codependent. You know when you're sober from alcohol. It is a real challenge to know when you're sober from codependence because it sneaks in when you're not looking, because it is so baffling and so cunning. And you can't just stop. You keep interacting with people, and you keep finding ways to abandon yourself. It affects the mind, the body, and the spirit. It affects the mind with a core issue that I have been calling negative internal dialogue. We talk to ourselves in a way that is so nasty that if we picked up the telephone receiver and someone on the other end of the line talked to us the way we talk to ourselves, we would immediately hang up the phone and call it a crank call, an obscene phone call. We have thoughts in our minds that tell us we're not okay, going, unfortunately for many of us, even in our sleep. It also affects our mind in that many of us who have this as part of our disease process, we have depression, we have resentments, we have guilt. There's a whole affective component to codependence. It affects our body in that when we are acting out of a codependent place in our lives, we have a tendency to have migraines, ulcers, colitis, cancer. There is some data to indicate there's a correlation between being codependent and having these different diseases. It affects our spirit in that the essence of codependence is self-abandonment. It's an abandonment of who we are at essence. We will not live our own life. We give it away to other people. Other people come first. We spend our time controlling other people, and it does not allow us to flower and be the being that we were meant to be. So we often walk around not knowing who we are and do not have contact with our inner guide or any voice, because every time it talks to us, we tell it to shut up. We tell it off and tell it it's leading us astray. This is also a disease of the individual and the family and society. In the individual, it affects us as we relate to ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves, the way we treat ourselves. It relates to what Claudia was saying last night about taking care of ourselves. Have you allowed yourself to take breaks? Have you allowed yourself time to eat your meals? Have you allowed yourself a chance to find the bathrooms and use them more than once every 8 hours? It affects our family in that we have whole areas in our family that we don't talk about. We take care of other people. We don't want to upset the other family members. There are people here, not surprisingly, whose family don't know they're here. Sometimes that's a very wise decision, and sometimes that's a decision about not rocking the boat and not wanting people to know who we are. This disease also affects society, and that is beginning to cause me some concern. That as a society, I seem to see that we are telling ourselves we don't know enough to have a democracy. A democracy is a country that's ruled by the people. And many of us are believing that we don't have enough information, and we aren't smart enough to know what's going on, so we can't participate in making decisions. We have to leave it up to our government. They know more than we do. That's not the definition of a democracy. We have incidents like we had last month when Dan Rather is interviewing George Bush, is a little pushy on the Iran-Contra affair because Bush hasn't been particularly clear, and the calls that came into CBS were to say that Dan Rather should be much nicer, that he was too pushy, he was too aggressive in his questioning. I consider that public codependence. Thank you. Thank you. We have a whole lot of other historical things about the people around Nixon who would not tell him when he was going cuckoo. A variety of other things that go on that we are not speaking up to. Now also realize that along the line in our recovery, we cannot be available for some of the things that are happening on other levels, like at a national level. And in fact, I stopped taking the LA Times for about 3 years because I couldn't stand it. I couldn't hold my own ground reading all the news. And I had, in fact, to turn into being with myself and sorting out my own material before I could go out and pay attention to what was happening publicly again. It's very similar to how my partner and I talk about doing the stages of recovery. We really must do the first stages of recovery before we go back out into the public and stop being an adult child of an alcoholic and start being the adult child of the universe or of this country. First, we must do our work. Codependence seems to be with us all. It seems as though, by definition, if I'm the adult child of an alcoholic, then I am also codependent. And there's an old phrase that says, scratch an alcoholic and you find a codependent. Scratch an ACA and you find a codependent. I also believe that for many people in AA, that the reason quality sobriety is eluding them is because they need to treat the codependence which is related to the ACA material. And so the next step is to go back, to include other kinds of meetings with the AA meetings, and to work on this issue. And I'm not sure I could stand up in front of you all and say that if I didn't have a quote from Bill W. to share about it. Herb and I just put out our second book, which I'm delighted. It's being sold here for the first time. And it's not about codependence particularly. It's about the later stages of recovery. In it, I have a quote from Bill W. that talks about his codependence, and he did not use the word. What he wrote was, it's a letter he sent to a friend late in his recovery. Last autumn, depression, having no really rational cause at all, almost took me to the cleaners. I began to be scared I was in for another long chronic spell. By the hour, I looked at the St. Francis prayer. It's better to comfort than to be comforted. Here was the formula. It's better to comfort than be comforted. It's better to give than to receive. Here was the formula. But why didn't it work? Suddenly, I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Reinforced by what grace I could secure in prayer, I found I had to exert every ounce of will and action to cut off these faulty emotional dependencies upon people, upon AA, indeed any act by circumstance whatsoever. Then only could I be free to love. That was Bill. Bill kept right on working on his recovery all the way through. And I really appreciate the energy that he and Lois have given to this, because we would not be here if they hadn't dedicated their lives. I think Lois W. next week is like 92 and still alive and kicking. Grand old lady. It is not built into us. It doesn't come with the equipment. It's not genetic. We got it growing up. We got it trained into us. For most of the people here, we got certain messages almost every day, or 100 times a day, telling us, without labeling it, to please become codependent. One of the most classic scenes that my partner and I will often describe as to how the training occurs for us to give up ourselves, to abandon ourselves, is the dinner scene in which most of us participated 365 times a year for up to 18 years. It might have been the only time during the day that we got together with our family, because we had learned all kinds of ways to avoid them the rest of the day. But this was when you kind of had to grin and bear it and white-knuckle it at the dinner table. Well, at our dinner table, very often there was something very bad going on. What that might have been was, as the dinner was being cooked, my parents might have been drinking. And as we sat down to the table, one of my parents, perhaps my mother, might have lost her balance or dropped a plate. I'm sitting at the table with my sister and my brother, and here's this accident that occurs. In fact, in some homes, mother might even have lost her balance and fallen to the floor. right as dinner was starting. If I'm a child sitting at that table, my natural response is to have my heart rate go up, my pulse start beating, sweat break out in my palms, to literally get an adrenaline rush, a fight or flight, because that's the normal response to this situation. There's a crisis in front of me. And at this dinner table, what happens is I start to get up and respond to the crisis. I start to reach over to help pick Mom up and clean up the mess, and what I get instead is my father reaching across the table, putting a hand on my shoulder and saying, "Sit down and eat. What's the matter with you?" Now, I might naively say, "But Mom just fell and she's having a hard time getting up and I think she might have hurt herself." And my father might say, "Sit down and shut up. There's nothing wrong here." We talked this morning in the Genesis presentation about the decision a child faces at that moment. That child decides if they're going to be safe or if they're going to be right. Now, the normal, natural, right thing is to say, "Dad, you're cuckoo. Mom is hurt. She fell. She's right there in front of my eyes. I can see what I see, and I know what I know, and I'm scared." That's to be right. I don't know about your home. In my home, you didn't say those kinds of things to Dad. In my home, if you were smart, in my home, if you made a wise decision as a child, in my home, you sat down and ate right through the lump in the throat, right into the knot in the stomach, right through what my nervous system just told me was reality. I learned a couple of things. I learned to not trust these adult people, that somehow the message is weird. But I learned something more profound that's the essence and the etiology of the codependence. I learned not to trust myself. Doing that 365 times a year, doing that, taking the safe route, which was the wise route, taught me to abandon myself and my sense of the world. Guess who my guides become? Anybody but me. Anybody else knows more. I obviously am very confused. I think things like that are crises and are supposed to be handled. But no, that's not the way it works here. Well, my system's so screwed up that I have to teach it to shut up. When I start doing that, I have started the foundation of codependence. The reason codependence is such a disastrous disease is because then I can't tell, according to me, what's for me and against me. It's like being a cook and being in the kitchen with fires, and I don't have any feedback system to tell me that I just put my hand in the fire, that pain doesn't get processed. I don't trust that pain. So I don't know when to take my hand out of the fire. So what kind of relationships do codependents have? It's the same definition of alcoholism. Relationship, pain, relationship. Just like drink, trouble, drink. We become addicted to other people, and for actually very good reasons. The training was very profound. And we need guides, and we can no longer trust ourselves. So we learn to control the other people around us. We learn to find out from them how we are. To take this to its logical conclusion would be if you ask me how I am, I would say, you tell me. And we don't voice that, but that's how we live our lives. We live our lives out of our own center, searching for something outside of ourselves, and having no real clue as to how to nurture ourselves, how to take care of ourselves. We have to keep asking other people. The other people that will tell us how to take care of ourselves, are precisely the people we ought not be hanging out with. They're the ones who have been looking for a codependent. They're the ones who are generally dependent upon something themselves and need someone to enable them, because enabling is the language of codependence. And while we're using alcohol terminology, co-alcoholism, addiction, codependence is not just in the alcoholism field, and it is not just with an alcoholic. Codependence is something we are doing all the time when we forsake ourselves. And one of the ways we do that is we want to be nice people. That smile that Claudia was showing last night. Being just fine and putting on a front. We do not want to hurt other people's feelings. Someone said to me over lunch that she spent 11 years in AA and she was doing good and felt bad. We do all the right things for all the wrong reasons. We are very nice people. I recently discovered that one of my fears is that I'm evil. And that's one of the things I've been afraid of, that I might be a really bad person. So I have to keep being really nice for fear that this bad stuff in me will come out. It's like a hangover from really believing that I'm a bad kid. That's why I invited the kids to be here. Our kids know better than we know in our adult minds. And they might be able to hear better and guide us better right through this. If you can begin to get a sense and an awareness of what it's like and what it's been like to live a life in which you cannot be responsible to yourself because you're not trustworthy. As far as you know, there's something wrong with your system, and you cannot rely on it. You have to go to other people. You have to ask other people what movies to see. You have to ask other people who to vote for. Have to ask other people what to wear. Now, I'm not saying consultants aren't great, but if that's of higher value than your own values, then you've moved into codependence. We get so afraid to make a mistake. Naturally. I mean, mistakes were not allowed in my home. If you couldn't do it right, you might as well not do it. It took me years in recovery to realize that anything worth doing is worth doing wrong. That's how we learn. We get afraid to risk being a fool. We get afraid to risk someone else not liking us. We get afraid to risk someone being upset. As if that child is doing life and death issues. It's one of the reasons the child within is becoming a part of the healing component in this recovery process. Because that fear we get when we want to tell someone we don't like what's going on, when we want to tell someone that we have a different opinion, when we want to tell someone that we're angry, once we even know, and of course, knowing that is the first stage of recovery, because we don't even know we're angry. We get that hidden from ourselves so quickly. We don't even process what's happening inside. Once we have found out, then we're faced with, are we going to own it? And the fear is that either they will die or I will die. And in some respects that was true when we started out on this journey. If we were who we were as kids, it really was dangerous. We really were little. We really were dependent on those big people. So to confront an adult who, well, my dad when I was little was about 8 feet tall. It's amazing, he shrunk a lot. When I was little, if I wanted to say anything back to him, I felt I was taking my life in my hands. And in some respects, that was true. Because it was a life and death issue. What is happening now is a core issue called age regression. When we are faced with being who we are, when we are faced with being different from other people. The feeling that gets generated inside is a feeling of a child, the fear of a child. It got locked inside because in most alcoholic homes, in most traumatic homes, you don't get to talk about your fear. You don't get to handle the feelings that you have. If you can't handle them, if they aren't mentionable, then they are not manageable. They get locked inside, sort of like arrested development. So we walk around with these kids inside of us who get crazy on us sometimes. And I work with people who have teenagers that in the middle of relationships, their teenager starts throwing tantrums and starts getting real rebellious and acting real strange, and the adult person who's in the relationship is going, whoa, what's happening here? And it's their teenager who needs to really assert her identity or his identity. And sometimes we're in a conversation and we suddenly feel differently than the other person, and we get the feeling that if we were to say so, something terrible would happen. That's age regression. And the first thing that needs to happen is to know that that fear belongs to a child, and rightfully so. The child really was dependent and did not have your resources. If you will just become aware right now of the resources you have as an adult, you planned how to get here to this conference. You got the money together somehow. You arranged your transportation. You brought notebooks. If you didn't have a pen, you found a way to get one. You have car keys. You have a home. Most of you have a job. These are resources that the children we were did not have, which means that we can let our children know now that we'll take care of them. To recover from codependence requires a real commitment to hang in there through the months and the years and through the fear and the pain. And I often think of recovery as the same kind of commitment and process that was shown so elegantly in the movie called Aliens 2. How many of you saw that movie? Would you raise your hand? About a fourth of you did. There's a real powerful story there. I wouldn't have gotten it probably because I thought it's violent, so I'm not going to see it. I don't see violent films. But a client of mine came in and said, I have the greatest metaphor for recovery. And it only cost you $5. Well, I thought I was charging her enough. Maybe that she's just getting back at me, so I started to hand her $5. She says, no, not $5 to me. Go down to the theater and see Aliens 2. And I did. What happens in Aliens 2 is there is an adult heroine, in this case it's a woman, who has gone through horror. She's gone through terror. She's gone through danger, and she has survived. She makes it back to Earth. Everyone else that was with her, gone. I mean, many of us also have people who are gone, who didn't make it here. She gets back to Earth and tries to explain what happened, and nobody believes her. They think she's just making up stories. It couldn't have been that bad. But she's having nightmares and flashbacks. Her past does not just go away because she's adult, back on Earth, safe. She's asked to go back to the scene of the crime, where it all happened, her childhood home, the other planet. And she says, no way. I am not going back there. That place was horrible. And I remember how scared I was and how bad the pain was. But her nightmares continue. She can't hold a job. She's not doing well. She finally agrees to go back to where it occurred, to where her trauma occurred, which would be like for us agreeing to go back and recover our childhood, right in the face of our fear. She goes back, gets to the planet. She has brought with her the military. She has hired all the consultants she could get. She's got Marines, I believe, on that flight, and they are fully equipped. When they get to the planet and start searching, going back through all the places that she left, they find, as they walk into one room, some kind of creature rushes across in front of the camera and shoots into some kind of tubing or piping. And you can just kind of barely see what it was. And she dives into the piping and crawls along this narrow pathway and comes into this wretched little room filled with debris, and huddled in a corner is a small child. Frightened, unkempt, hair unbrushed, face dirty, rags on. Obviously this child has not been cared for some time. She tries to approach the child, and the child is very frightened and tries to elude her. Now, in the movie, she does something I don't advise. She grabs the child forcibly. In recovery, we don't have to do that. If we will hang out with our child within, just as if we're hanging out with a hurt animal, speaking softly and quietly, and giving that child his or her space, eventually we can befriend our past. In the movie, she grabs the child. She sees the child is in danger, and so she grabs her, drags her out. The child will not speak. The child is withdrawn. The child will not answer questions. This woman then spends time with the child, brushes her hair, gets some damp cloth and wipes some of the dirt off, talks gently, and they begin to have a relationship. As this relationship builds, and the child voices her distrust of adults because she's been abandoned, this heroine in the movie promises, I will never leave you on this planet. I will never leave here without you. And therein is the commitment we're called to make for our recovery from codependence. The movie continues, and there are some wonderful scenes where the child gets very frightened and says, I'm frightened, and the adult says, I'm frightened too, and does not lie to her, does not pretend to be other than who that adult is. In the final scenes, the child is captured by the terror, the alien, again, and is taken apparently to her destruction. But this heroine is so committed to the child that there's a scene in which she goes into where the armaments are stored, and she puts on, I think not one but 2 machine guns, and ammo, and flamethrower, and everything she can get her hands on that she knows will help her when she's in danger. It's like us keeping those phone numbers there and calling our very best friends when we need them and saying, I am desperate. Please come and help me. She puts on all of this military equipment, and she goes right into the womb of the danger, following a beeper that she had given the little girl that emits signals that she can track. She recovers the child through an incredible scene, and they get out through many more incredible scenes. And one of the final scenes is this little kid looking up at her and saying, I knew you wouldn't leave me. We need to make that kind of commitment to our recovery. And we need to learn to love the person that we were. Truly, this is the only way I know to do it. Learn to love the person we were, where we have come from, the child that brought us this far. If that child hadn't lived, if that child hadn't adjusted, if that child hadn't done the things she or he had to do to stay alive, you would not be sitting there and I would not be standing here, and I owe a debt of gratitude to the little girl that was frightened a lot in my childhood. And I need to love her and accept her. That's part of the step and the steps that will lead us to begin to trust ourselves. We need to build trust with the child within. We need to build trust with ourselves. And as that happens, we can begin to represent ourselves more, relying less and less on your opinion of me. And truly, this is not an all or nothing, and this is not perfection. This takes years. And it's the process that my partner and I described in our first book, Recovery, A Guide for Adult Children of Alcoholics. First thing you have to do is survive. You had to get here. Some people didn't. The next thing is to become aware. Can you even see that there are times and places where you're giving yourself away, you're abandoning yourself again, you're not honoring who you are? Just see it. See that it relates to your past, to the training, not the genetics, to the training. Anything that has been learned can be learned in a new or different way. If I learn my geography bad, I can go back to a map and learn my geography properly. If I learned the language of codependence in my childhood home, I can learn a new language as an adult, but I'll tell you, learning a new language takes 3 to 5 years. And we almost always have the hint of the accent, which means we need to be vigilant. There's no cure. There is recovery. Once we see an emergent awareness that it connects to our past and that there's hope, then in core issues we begin to watch, okay, what is it we're doing? One of the issues is control. One of the issues is age regression. One of the issues is this negative self-dialogue. And just open our eyes to where it's getting us. And in codependence, open your eyes to who in your life is it most difficult for you to say, no, this is what I want. No, this is what I feel. Hey, I'm angry about this. You see, we have a continuum of people in our lives. We have people who are pretty easy. Usually they're strangers. And people that are pretty hard. Usually they're our parents or our lovers. Always start from the easiest and move to the hardest, because as you work through the easiest, you build up your muscles. It's like when you start running. Do not run 10 miles the first day. Half mile maybe, and keep that up for a few weeks while your body gets used to it. Start with the easy. Move to the more difficult. But also know. Move out of denial. And if you have the courage, allow yourself to know who you're doing this with. We need to know our core issues and our core people. Then transformations is doing the work, and that means spending time with that kid. It's like doing that simple little exercise sometime later today again, where you just take a minute and you pause and you just watch yourself breathe and send in a signal. It might just be you say inside your head, I really do want to know about my child within. Spend 60 seconds like that. That's part of the work of transformations. After some time, if you hang in there, you can move into integration, where you really do say what you think and act in a way that's congruent to what you're saying and thinking, so that you become one person instead of the schizophrenic who does one thing over here, another thing over there, and does not have one identity. It is risky. People then, when they come up to you and say they don't like something, will be saying it to you instead of this facade. But if you have taken the time to learn to love yourself, you can handle it. And then, the last stage of recovery, Genesis, allows us to do for others from a foundation of having learned how to do from ourselves. So in being here for you, I don't abandon myself. So that in arranging to go to someone's sick bed, I've already been sure that I took care of my own needs. So that if I find myself having extended myself too much, I will pull back and call for someone to come and take care of me. Learning to nurture ourselves requires that we love ourselves. But there's something I learned in graduate school that I I hated when I learned it, but it's been real helpful since I got into the ACA movement. I used to think that attitude change preceded behavior change, and that if I would just fix my head and I would just understand things better, then I would act differently. I found out that it's much more effective to change my behavior. Start taking care of yourself. Start taking care of yourself. It's a different way of looking at the fake it till you make it. This is for you. Pretend like you like yourself. Pretend like you deserve a break today. Pretend that you're the kind of person you would want for a friend, and here's how you would treat yourself. And begin to think in those ways. And it does take a commitment. And many people don't make it. The journey of recovery is not for the faint of heart. It requires coming back. Not necessarily to this one meeting, but coming back to your recovery. If you take a week off and you go crazy and you abandon yourself and you do everything that was really bad for you and you take on 25 projects and have no time to sleep, at the end of that week go, okay, I blew it for a week. And now I'm going to do something different. You must call yourself back time and time again, because the only definition of success is getting up one more time than you fall down. What I would like to do is to spend some time with you all doing your own processing about what codependence is for you. So I'd like to take the next few minutes and ask, first I want to say, before I ask, moving beyond codependence requires that you say no. You have to learn how to say no to move beyond. And what I'm going to ask you to do, feel free to say no. I'll give you a series of sentences to complete, and you can pass on any of them. In fact, please do. Please pass on at least one of them so that you can begin to have to, or you fail this afternoon workshop. We got your names at the door. First thing I'd like to ask you to do, and it will take a few minutes, and it'll be kind of noisy in the room, and it might sound like an alcoholic family while we're doing it. I'd like you to, in some way, make groups of, say, 5 or 6 people. And you might swing your chairs, or just each 6 kind of turn around and face one another in some fashion so that we have separate groups that can work together. I want to commend you on your courage. Each time at a conference like this, something is done that includes me as a participant. I always know that my heart beats faster and that it takes an extra stretch and extra courage to be willing to look at another person. They might ask me to talk to other people, right? What I'm going to do is give you a series of sentences to complete very briefly. If I give a sentence that is standing up here on the stage, that's just not a good one, sitting here in my chair, and I say, now complete that sentence, you don't complete it by saying, sitting here in my chair, I can feel, the tightness in my shoe, and that I've got the shoelace tied too tight, and, I'm hungry, I didn't quite get enough at lunch because there wasn't enough time to eat, and I'm thirsty because I didn't get a chance to pour my water because it's starting and I didn't have time to do that, and just very simply, one sentence, quickly, whatever comes to your mind. Sitting here in my chair, I feel comfortable or tense. There's no right and wrong. How about that? Even the first question, which is, my name is, you could make up if you want, but of course you're wearing a name tag, so they'll be suspicious. Don't be held or bound by the truth. Feel free. You can answer these any way you want, briefly. And we'll just go in the circle. Would one person in each circle identify yourself as the start person? That's the firstborn adult child. Or it was the codependent taking care of all of you who wouldn't take the responsibility. I'll give a sentence, and because we're all different and the groups are all different, I may not ask you to pause for the next sentence exactly at the time you get back to your first start person. If that's the case, keep going around with the sentence, answering it any way you want, again. And keep going until I ask you to pause. Again, you really will have not understood what I've been saying if at least once you don't give yourself the freedom to pass on a question. The first question or sentence is, my first name is. Pause. And take a breath. Second sentence, and please repeat the sentence stem before you finish it. As I listened to Julie, same sentence. If you finish in your group, keep going around until I ask you to pause. Pause. And I know some of you haven't finished because some groups are slower and some groups are faster. But take a breath anyway. That's right. You're stretching. You're sharing. Next sentence stem. One of the most important things I heard. One of the most important things I heard. Pause. Mid-sentence and breathe. Next sentence stem. One of the ways in which I am a codependent is. One of the ways in which I am codependent is. Pause. Saved by the bell. Take a breath. Keep filling your lungs with oxygen. It helps the brain work. Next sentence stem. One of the ways I am not codependent is. Pause. That was a real challenge, wasn't it? Take a breath. Next sentence stem. As I listen to others, as I listen to others, as I listen to the others in my group, if that's more clear for you. Pause. Next sentence stem. If I listen to the child within, if I listen to the child within, pause and breathe. Second to the last sentence stem, and if you have not said pass, your report card's going to look awful. One thing I will do just for myself today is, one thing I will do just for myself today is, pause. I didn't want you to have to go around on that too much. Might have been an overdose. Last sentence stem. One of the things I'm beginning to realize is, one of the things I'm beginning to realize is, Pause. Breathe. The front row up here was my teacher, because I couldn't get all the way back there like I normally would do. And I'd like to comment on some of the things that I learned. Part of this process, I am reminded, includes fear, and for some it includes terror, like when we listen to our children. All you need to do is be willing to live through the terror, to live with that fear while it's here. All you need to do is be willing to put up with it. And let the kid know that you're not going to cut and run. I also want to say, when you answered the sentence, one of the things you're going to do for yourself today, take that as a commitment to yourself. Your kid was listening. It's true. And if you don't follow through on that, guess who's going to have one more piece of data that they can't trust you? So if you said something in answer to that sentence that you really can't do, then change it and replace it. But follow through on that promise. Your kid, that vulnerable part of you, does not need any more abandonment. So follow through on that one, and I hope it was a fun one. I'd like for you to just take this last couple minutes in your seats, and again, I'm going to ask you to go within and be with whatever part of you you might consider to be that child within. Again, if you do not have a concept of that, that's perfectly fine. Just know that it's something that you're curious about, and that you are going to open to the idea that there might in fact be a special, vulnerable, young part of you that is very much like a child within. And I would just like for you to squeeze that little hand that you placed in your big hand at the start of our time together not so long ago. I'd like you to check in, make sure that kid's okay. And I want to ask you, if you're willing, to make one more promise. Whatever sense of the child within or the vulnerable part of you that you have at this moment on the 15th of February in 1988, whatever sense you have of that, I would ask you to commit to spending some more time with that part of you, to come back again, even though we're going to part. I'm going to go back to Santa Barbara, and you're going to go back to your home. That kid is going with you. If you have the courage right now to inside your heart say, I will come back to this place and see what this whole thing about child within is about. Or if you have a real clear sense of that kid, to just look him or her in the eye and say, honey, I love you, and I will not abandon you again. And know when you walk out of this room, the child that you were and are goes with you. And I leave you with a final thought. It is not easy to find happiness in ourselves, and it is not possible to find it elsewhere. Thank you all very much for coming here and bringing your children.
We hope you enjoyed this recording. Please check out our website at sobrietytalks.com. You can also contact us by sending an email to sobrietytalks@aol.com. Thank you.